Well, it's funny, actually, and this is where there's such an interesting dynamic with Arsenal, given how locked down Arsenal have been. But, if you look back to last season, even City fans even had a chant about it, best defence in Europe, where a kind of a four that really worked well. And it was that system, basically, that Guardiola had devised to almost get the best out of Haaland at one end, but keep him secure at the other. Whereas this year, there is, not that they give you a chance in games, because City generally don't, but maybe they're not quite as controlled.
Well, look, as Gail said,
exactly.
4 goals for conceded for Arsenal since in this calendar year alone. I mean, that's remarkable.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I was at the Arsenal-Luton game 2 weeks ago, given who City played yesterday, and Rob Edwards, he was asked about kind of the difference between the 3 title teams after the game, and he did kind of almost make a point of saying that, well, it doesn't necessarily mean Arsenal are better than City. At the moment, Arsenal feels like they've got more ways to play a game, because they can either lock it down, and that's something they've been really impressive with lately, or they can open it out. And it does feel as well that is an effect of what happened to Arsenal at the Etihad last season when they got thrashed. That Arteta has responded to that. But of course, I suppose with Arsenal, we're still they're still figuring out how to work a title race, whereas City, they know better than anyone at this point, given what we're talking about.
It's like if you get in a cab and the driver knows all over London, so he knows where he's going, whereas the other driver sort of get the sat-nav out.
Oh, God, I could do it quicker. I could most of the time. Very good with my back knowledge of London streets. Anyway, we digress. I do want to talk to you about Erling Haaland, because he's kind of making the headlines, and I think kind of for all the wrong reasons, but I want to talk you through it. He's got his 20th Premier League goal this season. That's a great headline. But his form has been questioned by Roy Keane, who has likened his all-round form to that of a League Two player. Nothing against League Two. His kind of play, other than scoring goals. Jamie Carragher says he's a world-class finisher, but not a world-class player. Where do you stand on this first, Darren?
Listen, the first place to start off with is that you have to respect the reviews of the guys who played alongside world-class talent and clearly come from a different perspective. I think if you look at Haaland, he has now scored 83 goals in 87 matches. That is world-class form. And if those numbers don't scream world-class, I don't know what does. He scored 52 goals last season in all competitions. He shattered a record that had been held by Alan Shearer and Andy Cole as the leading scorer, the number of goals in a single season. And if you want a finisher, he is the most clinical, deadly, cold-blooded finisher we have seen in the Premier League for years. So is he world-class? Absolutely, because who are the best strikers in the world right now? Mbappe and Haaland. I don't include Vinicius and the likes of, because they're almost wide forwards, if you like. Harry Kane, of course, as well. But he's up there with those two. So that would, by definition, quantify him as being world-class. And everyone says, oh, he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that. Well, he did it at Dortmund, but he doesn't have to do it at City because he has that supporting cast around him. There's a terrific piece this week by Ian Laderman in the Mail where he talked about the work that he does drawing defenders out of position that allow the likes of Phil Foden to rack up the numbers he has so far this season, and De Bruyne to score goals and other people to get in on the goal-scoring action. And also, Riyad Al Samurai today in the Mail on Sunday saying, listen, rather than us arguing about this, why don't we just, it's a little bit like Messi and Ronaldo, why don't we just enjoy them both? We are very blessed to have that kind of calibre, but I will die on the hill that Haaland is absolutely world-class.
Before you come in, I just wanted to just quote Roy Keane, because I don't want to get into trouble with him, basically. But he said this, so his general play for such a player is so poor. It's not just today, he has to improve. He's almost like a League Two player. That's how I look at him. His general play, it has to improve, and it will do over the next few years. Over to you, Miguel. I
have to say I'm probably more on the Keane and Carragher side. Maybe wouldn't go as far as Keane there. But I did an article on this last year, about, January 2023, after the Manchester derby that they lost. And I think in that game, Haaland had 18 touches.
Yes. And
that was a bit of that was a pattern last season before. And it did cause Guardiola to kind of figure out this system that we were just talking about a few moments ago. Because he basically had to compensate for a player. I mean, when it comes down to Guardiola, we know what his ideal of football is. And it is probably a lot of 5'9" midfielders constantly having control of the ball. Haaland very, very much isn't that. But it does come down to control. And when you've got a player there who is all about kind of straight line running and finishing, it is a deviation from what Guardiola wants. And I mean, there was a good point from Barney Ronay in his piece yesterday on this issue of all these individuals or star individuals in the game and how they had maybe had disappointing performances midweek in the Champions League. If you look at what Guardiola, what his team tries to do, it's essentially crowding the entire game just around the opposition box. Whereas Haaland's best is probably running into space and then finishing. So there is a little bit of that's going to take adjustment, and that's where I think that's what Carragher and Keane
if he
are
doesn't
talking
score,
about, I'd say.
Does he contribute, do you feel?
Well, I mean, it comes back to the point Darren made that Ian raised during the week. It's about kind of almost this positional thing of drawing players away, which has a value, but you given what we've seen from Guardiola's entire career, including his previous teams at Man City, there are times you think where he might prefer Alvarez in terms of purely football, because Alvarez actually contributes to the kind of build-up play and the linking, whereas for Haaland, it almost becomes about space.
You see, I think he does contribute, and there's 2 points to make with that as well, because if you look through history, some of the greatest finishers we've seen and the most celebrated, Paolo Rossi, 82 World Cup, who managed to stop the greatest Brazil side I'd seen. Obviously, that's before the 70s and the teams before that. Lineker, Van Nistelrooy, there are so many magnificent finishers. I remember Stoichkov and Romario when they were at Barcelona, and Stoichkov, the Bulgarian striker, fabulous player, used to draw defenders out of position for Romario to run into spaces. If you look at Ollie Watkins this season, his numbers have been sensational. We've waxed lyrical about him, and what do we say when we ask him what his improvement is? He talks about Emery telling him to stay within the 18-yard box and focus on finishing, and then now other people to provide the ammunition for him. And I do think that Haaland does contribute to the game, because you cannot switch off for a second against a Haaland, because if you give him that space, that time, he will destroy you. And I think what his problem is, actually, he's set punishingly high standards for himself, that if he falls below them, he gets attacked. But he scored 2 goals yesterday, well, 1.5 goals we'll give him. But he missed, 6 weeks of the season, and he's still the leading scorer in the Premier League. I think in years to come, we will look back at this period and think, how did we ever doubt this guy who was he's like the Terminator, come in that little bubble and just kind of, morphed into the best striker we've seen in this country in Premier League history.
It's a good debate, anyway. The papers, what are they saying about Manchester
I've forgotten now.
That's what you're for. Come on.
We've got the back page of the People, and quite appropriately enough, here's the headline, top that.
Yeah.
5 scored past Luton. The big picture, actually, is that it's 41 games undefeated for Manchester City at the Etihad, stretching back to November 2022, one short of a record they set in 1921. But in the context of this season, these two are at the forefront of lifting City to the top for the first time since November. And even though we talk about their defensive deficiencies, if they can keep scoring at this rate, first time they've scored 5 goals since they put 6 past Luton in February, then it does indeed, as Miguel was saying, look ominous for the rest.
I want to talk to you about the title race, because I read a lovely piece of yours about the fact that we've not had this three-legged, yeah, that's the sort of race ever before, have we, in the Premier League? And what we're learning, and you feel that Arsenal have the most to learn in terms of their sort of gate crashing the party, but also the other two are learning as well. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, now I went through 124 seasons of English football history.
Wow, well done.
No, I mean, we've come close in the Premier League probably 3 times. 2014, which is where almost Chelsea just fell out of it, having pretty much killed Liverpool with that 2-0 win. Yeah. 2008, where Arsenal probably always just a little bit too far behind, and also 99. But Chelsea, again, were probably never quite in it. And I think the reason... So it's only probably happened mathematically 7 times where there's been a win between at least 3 teams on the last day, or with the way the table's finished. There have been other seasons, like 1986, where had Liverpool not won, it would have been a title decider between West Ham and Everton, but they did. And I think a huge reason for this, actually, is probably 3 points for a win. Because what that does is obviously kind of, if you get 1 win or 1 defeat at a certain time, it just kind of, by the mathematics of it, it doesn't take it that far. And it's why it's always difficult for three to be involved. But at least up until now, already we know the numbers. It's the closest title race of all time in terms of three teams within a point of each other with 7 games to go. And I suppose the hope is, I think for anyone looking on, that they do sustain it. And yeah, the point I made about Arsenal having most to learn, obviously they've got the education from last season, which feels really significant. But I suppose it's more so that they are kind of gate crashing the kind of what has been the Premier League's dominant duopoly, or at least kind of Liverpool challenging City, regularly winning over the last half decade, 7 years. So they're kind of the variable Arsenal. But what it does do as well is it means for both Klopp and Guardiola, well, they can't just focus on their own side and one rival in the way they would be used to. It's actually suddenly you're looking across at yeah, exactly. Now, of course, that might work in a different way as well, where because there's so many potential distractions, it only kind of fortifies that cliched line about, well, we can only concentrate in the next game. But yeah, even from what you hear inside dressing rooms, the way some of the managers have spoken, they come in after games and you're not looking for one result, it's 2.